Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the Biodiversity podcast by Teasels. And today I'm joined by Bob Bray of Robert Bray Associates. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Hi, fine. I'm awake, so that's good stuff.
You're awake. Fantastic. Good stuff. So, Bob, we've met on a couple of previous occasions, but for the uninitiated people out there, do you just want to give a bit of background on yourself and a bit of background on Robert Bray Associates and what you guys do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to say that my transition from just being a mere landscape architect to being a really enthusiast for sustainable drainage is all to do with my interest, a long-term interest really, on wildlife. And as a landscape architect, I tried to increase the value of the sites that I work with. And I had done a lot of work with amphibian conservation as well. So I think I was casting around to find a really good way that I could integrate biodiversity and placemaking into my landscapes. And in 1996, a friend of mine who was doing reed bed design said, well, you might find this interesting, and packed me off unceremoniously up to Coventry, where there was an introduction. It was called Nature's Way, and it was large. It was the Environment Agency, but also what became SEPA, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, and they were doing some work up in Scotland at a place called Dunfermline, Dunfermline East Expansion Area, the DEX project.
Yeah.
And they brought some Americans over to explain this new way of managing rainfall. And of course, I was the only landscape architect in the room. It was full of grey suits and shiny grey suits at that. And as we went through...
I can't see you in a suit, Bob.
Pardon?
I can't see you in a suit. I don't think you're a suit.
No, well, I haven't got one, so you won't. So I saw all these fabulous images from the States of basins and wetlands and ponds and what we now know are called swales, and the enthusiasm of, and to be fair, there were two engineers who were explaining this, and their enthusiasm about saying, and it wasn't all about flooding either, it was all about improving water quality. And their enthusiasm for this, and then I looked at what they were doing, and I said, well, this is landscape. I mean, this is using the landscape to manage rainwater. And one of the things that they said was, we are mimicking nature. And that rang some bells for me.
Yeah.
And I said, well, look, if you're mimicking nature and you're using the landscape to manage rainfall, this is landscape design, you know. But of course, the way we look at rainfall in Britain, and the way that we put it in pipes and we put it in boxes and all the rest of it had become an engineering discipline. And I suppose somebody who was less bloody minded than me would have said, oh, well, that's an engineer's job, but I didn't. I said, this is my job. And I must find an engineer who can add up, because I'm not very good with that. I've only got 10 fingers, you know. And I was very fortunate in being able to find a couple of sympathetic engineers. And I've been lucky in this right the way through, that for some reason, you know, it's like-minded people meet like-minded people, don't they, to some extent. Yeah. And so I've met like-minded engineers, and I've met many who are not, but they help me with the numbers. And partly the numbers are what's the rainfall information that we have, because we base all of these designs on historical records, really. Yeah. But you have to understand some magic to be able to get the numbers to use out of the other end, and I don't have that magic. That is, I can't operate some of these programs that would tell me what volumes I have to use and what flow rates I have to use. So once I had that basic information, I was away. You know, it's a bit like it unlocked it for me to do this. But very quickly I realized that many of the things which I had learnt from these guys from the States were not being implemented in Britain, even on the SuD schemes that were, and it wasn't called SuDS, it was called stormwater management or whatever it was. And and it was quite clear that the objective, the thing that made the engineer do it was flooding, controlling volume.
Yeah.
The thing that made me do it was mimicking nature. You know, and there was this dichotomy, and I very quickly found that my designs were completely different to the engineer's designs. And because of my interest, you know, in a sense, the idea of getting this water, managing it, cleaning it, the end product was lovely, you know, lovely landscape. Yeah, and so that was that's what got my belly fired, you know. So to cut a long story short, I was doing some work with motorway service areas at the time, not doing straight landscape, and the Oxford one, the guy from the operator said, "Bob, would you come and give us a price for doing the landscape?" And he was saying, "Oh, it's a real problem. This we may have to put in a sewer for 2 miles, stormwater sewer, because there's nowhere to drain this to." And I had noticed that there was this ditch. It was on clay, so there's got to be surface water somewhere. Yeah. So I noticed this ditch, and I said, "Well, you should be able to do this here." And he fortunately had seen something similar in France, and he said, "Well, look, could you do it for the same money? Could you design it for the same money? But we would save for this long tube to the River Tame." And I said yes, which was, I think, I had both fingers crossed behind my back when I said this. And the Environment Agency then were very supportive. They got the basic numbers for me. I remember it now. You know, 19.1 litres per second was the outfall rate, and they told me what the storage volumes were. Off I went, you know. And I was very, very fortunate, and I have to say I blagged quite a lot of it through, and I'm not saying it was perfect, and there were a number of issues which I won't go into. But at the end of the day, it was basically water kept at the surface, water travelling through either swales or simple short pipe connectors into basins, wetlands, long swales, and then out at 19.1 litres per second. Unfortunately, clearly I was in the right place at the right time, because nobody else was doing it. And so I got a lot of publicity for this, and I got the next one, which is Hopwood Park Motorway Service Area up on M42. I've always been a bit of a showman, so I did a lot of presentations and, you know, and song and dance routines, really.
Well, I've sat for a couple of them, and I testament to your showman skills. It's very good.
But it's enthusiasm. You know, I couldn't do it without the enthusiasm for the subject. And what we found was, of course, that by doing exactly what the guidance said, in a way, this business of cleaning the water as soon as possible and reducing the flow rate, it gives you tremendous opportunities to create both wetland habitat and temporary wetland habitat. So whether it's a wetland, whether it's a pond, whether it's a grass space which occasionally floods with water, and of course the continuity with SuDS, you're taking water from one place to another, which means that you can build continuity into your design. So if you're a newt, you can get from A to B on the surface in these wetland channels or whatever it might be, or in these long grass areas. And suddenly, you know, you realize that if you see SuDS in that way, it becomes this tremendous biodiversity opportunity. Yeah. And perhaps that's where we might go next.
We certainly will. So I'm just going back a couple of steps.
Yeah.
You said about that continuity and connectivity, because
yeah,
had a few people on the podcast where, you know, we're talking about sort of invertebrates and
yeah,
you know, having nature's corridors, allowing you know, invertebrates to sort of migrate and actually breed, and rather than just being condensed into these very tight-knit sort of ecosystem. So I guess there is an added benefit to that, where you can get you know, a wider landscape, you can get a wider habitat for.
Absolutely. And it's not just insects, of course. I mean, if you look at the way, for instance, I've got a personal interest, I've always been fascinated by amphibians. Now, amphibians follow pathways of wetness, if you like. I know that frogs, for instance, can tell where their natal pond is by smelling glycols, you know, so that,
Ah.
and so you'll often find them traveling uphill to a pond because the stream that's coming from the pond, or the wet feature that's coming from the pond, is carrying these glycols, which are produced by algae.
Mm.
And so it's not just insects, it's all sorts of animals. And of course, all plants as well will travel in that way.
Mm.
So, you know, a wetland plant, if it's got to jump half a mile, is going to struggle to get to somewhere. But if it can leapfrog down a series of wetland features, then it will do it. So it's all these corridors, whether it's a natural landscape or whether it's a manufactured landscape, if they have the characteristics that we look for, which are things like clean water, which are things like enhanced vegetation. So the height of the vegetation is almost an exponential thing. You know, the denser, the more structure that you can create in that landscape, the more things can move through it.
Yeah.
And of course, the longer the grass, the more structure there is to the vegetation, the better it holds water back and filters the water as well. So you've got this great synergy between the biodiversity and the thing we're trying to do, which is to manage rainwater.
Mm.
So it works very well both ways.
So that was in 1996, and again, like you were saying, that at that stage it was being led by engineers, and now you find yourself in 2020, where you've produced, or your company's produced some amazing schemes, which are really combining all those different elements. Because what like we've touched on, you've got about quality of water, quantity of water, and then the biodiversity side, and then the amenity.
Yes, and the evidence from our environmental investigations, for instance, where the issue of microplastics has suddenly come into high resolution at the moment. I think there was some information from work that Bangor University have done.
Yeah.
I mean, we work in London a little bit, and for instance, the River Thames, there are something like 81 or 82 pieces of microplastic in every 1 litre of river water in the River Thames. Mm-hmm. Now, where's that coming from? By far the biggest volume of that is coming from tyre waste. And of course, the sort of SuDS systems that we build, whether it be permeable surfaces like permeable pavements, or whether it be sort of forebays to trap silt, that takes those tyre waste, those microplastics, it hits them right at source. And this business of cleaning that water at source means that as the water begins to travel down the management train, we know that the water is going to be substantially clean. Yeah. So, you know, and another bit of research I read the other day, that dippers, they're now finding dippers which are feeding in watercourses, the birds. They are now ingesting microplastics which are in their food, in the watercourses. Now, I'm not saying SuDS can do everything in this regard, but every time you look at what SuDS can deliver, you see more multi-benefit aspects to this. Yeah. And people, of course, are some are more wild than others, of course, but people are part of this ecosystem as well, and people are getting benefit. So in London, people are beginning to want to look after some of these SuDS systems. The one we did at Bridget Joyce Square in at White City, there's a local gardening group who are looking after that. So unlike to my knowledge, I don't know too many people who want to look after a drain, you know, a pipe under the ground. There's no sexiness in a pipe under the ground, but the more you design these things to look beautiful and to look interesting, the more people get involved in them.
Yeah.
And schools will look after their own. So we've done a lot of work on schools, and so children sort of almost subliminally can pick up these issues. And I think they're a great teaching resource, because you've got biodiversity, you've got geography, you've got physics, you've got numbers, you've got all of these things which you can use to help people understand how all of these topics, if you like, relate to everyday life. And so schools have been quite something we've done a lot of work on. And of course, unlike the ponds that I remember doing when I was, trying to do new conservation, the features that you create for in a SuDS system, they are there for a purpose. So therefore, people don't go and dig them up willy-nilly, because they are there as a resource to manage rainfall. So you get that continuity of their existence as well. And if we had SuDS approving bodies, as they now have in Wales, there would be even more security in terms of these things will stay. I mean, it's unfortunate, but often, for instance, commercial sites and some housing sites, because there's no money available, or because people decide that they don't want to spend money, these things don't get maintained and looked after. They still function, but they don't maximise their benefit. All of these things can turn to woodland eventually, and sometimes that can be a good thing, of course. But the main thing is to small and often maintenance interventions. Very little things to, like cutting grass and checking that water's going through a control structure. Little things like that is all that these things need. It works well for people and people who have responsibility for looking after these. And we spend a lot of time persuading people that they can't believe how easy they are to look after.
Yeah. But I also guess that there is the sort of there's the cost, and then there's the maintenance of SuDS systems. But then compared to underground pipe, pipe to, how did you describe it? Pipe to bomb crater, and that's sort of the difference between the two. And
and all the evidence suggests that these things are certainly in greenfield, in new situations, they're always cheaper than conventional. Or if you design them well, they're always. I mean, I'm a landscape architect. I can spend people's money. Don't get me wrong. But if you want a cheap and cheerful SuDS system, they're always cheaper than a pipe system. And in terms of looking after them, by and large, they're site maintenance, not SuDS. It's not. If you're cutting the grass, then you'd have to cut the grass somewhere else. Yeah. So. You're cutting grass, but you're picking up litter. We had a discussion just the other day. Somebody was saying, "Oh yes, but they collect litter." And as I say, I think I don't know whether I gave this example to you before, but we had this on a school, and the caretaker was saying, "Bob, we really like your SuDS system, but they do collect litter." And she's a lovely woman, go on with her, great. And I said, "Well, where would you like the litter? It could be all over the playing field if you like, or we can concentrate it in one place so that you can go and pick it out of it." And she twigged, and I said, they don't generate litter, but they do collect it for you. Good job, yes. So again, sometimes if you go to things with a negative view of things, you can find problems. But they don't generate litter, but they do collect litter. And that's the way to look at it.
But again, it's a newer way of thinking, and I guess I'm not saying. Well, perhaps I am saying SuDS is at its infancy in the UK, and where it's gradually moving from an engineer-led to more of a. Well, you mentioned earlier about, is it more ecologist-led, where ecologists have more of a say? Are they brought into a design team?
Well, I think it should be multidisciplinary, and on that, so there is an engineering element of it, and we have had to learn the engineering side of it over the last 30 years, in fact. We've had to learn the engineering side of it, but it's relatively straightforward, relatively simple engineering, the sort of engineering that you'd expect a landscape architect to be able to do: pavement design, inlets and outlets, etc. Whether an ecologist could do, what an ecologist could do is advise on optimizing the ecological value of something. Equally, somebody who's an urban designer, for instance, could optimize the urban value of that particular installation. So you either see it as multidisciplinary, that you need 5 or 6 different people in there. The reason I believe that it should be that landscape architects have a big role in this is that nearly everything that you need to do in SuDS, theoretically, a landscape architect should be able to do it. So whether it's pavement, whether it's planting, whether it's landform, whether it's urban design, and even, I'll risk it here and say, even if it's a matter of arithmetic, you know, there are programs which will give you the basic numbers. Mm. One of the issues is that these subsystems don't perform accurately in the same way that a pipe does. So there's lots of, for instance, we're encouraging natural losses. We're encouraging it to behave like a natural landscape. And it can be very difficult to accurately get the volume. So if you've got the basic volume, usually our systems overperform because most of the time they're losing water into the ground or evaporation or through the leaves of trees. Mm. And so
so Bob, can I stop you there? So you're talking about this site should act like it was before it was developed. So the greenfield.
That's the driver, yes.
Yeah.
So the more you get towards the natural system, the more natural processes begin to happen.
Yeah.
So interception is one of these really important things which, and I think the engineers find this quite difficult, is that the concept of interception is that there will be losses before you get water beginning to either flow across the site or infiltrate into the ground. Yeah. So but that depends on climate, it depends on whether you've had a dry period before, depends on the soil, depends on all sorts of things. Mm. And not only does that process enhance the landscape in terms of its biodiversity, it also takes this simple volumetric analysis and says, look, these numbers are only guides. You know, so the numbers aren't, in my opinion, the numbers are guides rather than critical. They're not set in stone. They're guides as to the volumes. And I know you need that, but it's we're not talking about decimal points here. We're talking about, you know, tens of cubic meters or something like that. And so at the moment, I think a lot of people have been intimidated about getting into it because they see that it's a numbers game. And in fact, that's once you've done the initial calculation or you've had the initial volumes expressed to you, it's a design discipline. It's because it's all at the surface. It's got to look good. It's got to work well. It's got to be easy to manage. And coming back to the biodiversity thing, it's got to recognize that the sooner you clean the water, then the sooner you get biodiversity benefits. Mm. And one of the best books for this is still available, I hope, is the SEPA publication, Ponds, Pools and Lochans. And Lochans are small lochs. I am reliably informed. I'm half Glaswegian and I never heard of a Lochen, but it's a fabulous work. It's produced by SEPA, but it was written by Jeremy Biggs, is it, from who used to run Pond Conservation, and now called Habitat, Aquatic Habitat or Wetland Habitat. And it's quite clear that the main thing from their perspective in a wetland habitat is clean water. Yeah. And clearly with all this thing of microplastics and oils and heavy metals coming off street furniture and all that stuff, that source control is absolutely crucial for the biodiversity of any SuD scheme. And we're meticulous in that.
So Bob, I'm curious actually. This is more of a personal question actually. You know, let's say you're an amphibian, and let's just say the water isn't water quality isn't controlled.
Yeah.
And it ends up in a basin. Yeah. What is that pollution actually doing to the amphibians?
Well, the amphibian is a really good example. The amphibian is the canary in the cage.
Yeah.
There's huge amounts of evidence that because of their skin being completely permeable,
yes,
yeah. And the tadpole is another example. In America, for instance, there were frogs which were getting 5 legs and things like this, and tadpoles would get to full term and then just die. And it turned out they were basically trying to reproduce in a chemical soup, really. And it's a bit like the insects that get their oxygen below water, and the insect larvae which get their oxygen from above water. The indicator to a healthy stream is look at the insects which breathe underwater. They will tell you if it's a good quality. And the amphibian is a similar sort of signal. And lots of people said, why are we not seeing frogs everywhere? Why are we not got, when I was a kid, there were newts and frogs everywhere. And one of the reasons is they are, even if you provide them something that looks perfect habitat, if the water is filthy, particularly if it's got weed killers, herbicides, pesticides, all of these other things in there, you won't get the recruitment because they're dying almost at source. We have got to get that water clean before it gets into those situations. And that's one of the things which we're very, very careful to do, is to take out those, permeable pavements are great at taking those out. But if you're dealing with, say, a more green system, should we say, for the sake of argument, using the top of the landscape, you need a forebay, you need somewhere where the water, all the silt, because largely this stuff's attached to silt and stuff. And until we as a society stop putting rubbish into our environment, weed killers, pesticides, all these stuff, you have to trap it as soon as very, very possible you can. And that's where the surface conductivity is great, because those surface corridors of vegetation, they act as a filter as well. So this idea that very often you see nearly 95% of what's coming through the planning system at the moment is a pipe to a bomb crater, pipe to a pond, if you like.
Can I just stop you there? Because I drive, when I'm driving around, you see so many pipes to bomb crater, and it amazes me that I'm personally aware of all the manuals, all the information. I mean, there's a thing called the internet. Like it's not like it's in a book somewhere.
There's no secrets. There's no secrets here.
And it's like, how does that get through?
Well, first of all, the engineers don't understand the system. They default all the time to conventional drainage. The developers say, we don't want SuDS, we want gully pots. And that doesn't, most of what goes into the gully pot is flushed along the tube. They only really pick up grit and very heavy oils. All the more subtle stuff goes straight down the tube. So why does this not happen? Well, if you look at the way the system's arranged, and this is political as much as anything, we would have had the SuDS approving bodies if it hadn't been for political intervention. And what the SAB would have done would have had officers who were trained in SuDS and who could have looked at a scheme and said, this is not accurate. At the moment, they go to the planner. The planner then says, oh, well, I don't understand this, sends it off to the lead local flood authority, who are really interested only really in volumes most of the time. And they say, yeah, the volumes look all right. And it goes back to the planner, and the planner says, well, I don't understand how this works. Tick. And so, and that's how the pipe to pond. And the industry, particularly the housing industry, is very, very resistant to any of this stuff. No, clearly they don't have children and they don't have grandchildren, but there we are, that's their problem. So we haven't got a mechanism at the moment for weeding that out, or insisting that they do a proper SuDS scheme, because they'll say, oh, well, it costs money, which it doesn't, or it's difficult to maintain, which it isn't. And who's going to police it? We don't have an effective policing mechanism now. We don't work for most housing developers, because most housing developers don't want what we do. So the sort of housing we're involved in is co-housing schemes or housing association. We're working at the moment in Yorkshire, and there the client wants what we're doing, wants what we're offering. If we went to the big volume house builders, they'd say, we don't want that, we've got engineers to do that. And they'll get, and because they've been doing pipe to bomb crater for 30 years, they don't want to change and they know what all the cost of everything is. Every scheme is based on the same layout, basically, road, turning head, out again, full of gully pots. They don't want to change any of that. As far as they're concerned, they've got a winning formula. So I don't know, there will be change, but it's murderously slow. I thought, in my advanced years with 123 or however old I am, I thought all of this would have been sorted out, by now. 30 years, I thought, oh, I'll be living in nirvana. I'm afraid not.
So where, before I took you off out of your flow, we were talking about source control. So if you give us perhaps a few examples of how we can control it at source. So
Well, the two ideals in a way are green, blue roofs and permeable surfaces.
Yeah.
What happens there is all the rain that falls on the roof or on the pavement goes through the pavement, the roof acting like a meadow, the permeable pavement operating like a porous soil. I mean, I live in Gloucestershire, Stroud. You know, we've got oolitic limestone here, so the water goes straight through the oolitic limestone. So these two techniques are great because as the water goes through them, it takes out the particles, which means it takes out the microplastics, it takes out the, and most of the pollution is associated with these particles. So they're taken out. Obviously in the roof, it's not very severe, but on permeable pavement, it takes out all the oil, it takes out all the tire waste, it takes out everything. Water goes through this stone and comes out the end, and it's essentially clean. Yeah. So those are the two perfect ones. But historically, and in a lot of situations where you can't use those, you have.
Like you were so just to get that. So even if you're going through the permeable paving,
yeah.
it's going through the so it's being filtered via the joints and
yeah.
then being filtered through the sub base and then into a basin underneath.
Well, it depends where you are. If you're on most soils, you don't need a liner. Some of it, depending on how impermeable the soil is, you can either let it go soak into the ground, which is where it should go, or you can let it out because you've effectively created a little pond, temporary pond, and so the water goes out through a flow control at greenfield runoff rate, like it would have left that location in nature. Yeah. So it is mimicking, again, it's a mimic, if you like, of a free draining soil. Just as the green roof is the mimic of the meadow. Yeah. But where you can't do those two, you have to think of some other way. So there are a number of vegetated systems. So you can go through what's called a filter strip, which is really a glorified grass verge. The vegetation takes it out, and the pollution is locked right at the beginning of the system in the soil. Yeah. So the particles are locked there. It's the same with a filter drain, but you have to be a bit more careful because that can clog up. Or you have something called a forebay basin. Similar sort of thing. The water comes in at a point, and first you catch the first part of the storm or the first part of the rainfall, and that takes out those particles, takes out the oils, takes out the other pollutants. And ideally, when that's full and has got what we call the first flush, that's the first lot of water that pulls pollution off a hard surface. Yeah. Ideally, the remaining water is substantially clean. So you divert that bit into, say, another basin where you allow it to infiltrate, or you use it for biodiversity or whatever. But in all of these systems, you have to have some mechanism which takes that first flush of pollution out of the rain, the runoff.
So are you referencing your sort of catchments and subcatchments? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's another. The idea of subcatchments is a bit more subtle, really. The conventional pipe drainage works with tiny pipes, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. You get a spider's web, and once if you imagine, sometimes say this to people in the training. I say, imagine you're a raindrop, and I like saying that to engineers in particular. So imagine you're a raindrop, and you disappear down a hole in a drainage system, pipe drainage system. You'll find yourself accelerating down this, unless the thing is full, in which case you flood all over the place. But otherwise, you are accelerated through this, and you end up in some massive pipe, which then drops you unceremoniously into sewage works or into a stream or into a river. And that pipe system, once you're in that pipe system, you can't get out. There's no sort of bus stop or anything down that pipe system. So if you're carrying a load of muck with you, that muck goes down there with you, If, however, you're in a SuDS system and you break that area up into small parcels, and the small parcels we call subcatchments, you can control the at source, firstly, you can take pollution out. And secondly, each of your little features can become storage features because you can put a flow control at the end of them. Yeah. And each of those, that sort of defines what your it's a flexible concept, but the idea that you're breaking things into smaller areas and each one becomes its own system, if you like. And that means that you can trap pollutants where they occur rather than they get into the pipe system and just end up in the nearest river. So that source control, subcatchments, these are all ways of ensuring that pollution doesn't get into the drainage system or whatever.
Okay. So you throughout the podcast, you use the word flow control on a few occasions. Can you just give a bit more information to the listeners?
Yeah. Well, I often liken it to a bath. You know, if you're in a bath, if both taps running, that's rainfall, but your plug hole is your flow control. Yeah. So if you keep both taps running, it's going to overflow, especially if you get into it. But if you turn the taps off, that means it's the end of your rainfall event. Yeah. So, you know, your bath, say half full or full, 2/3 full or whatever it is, but the plug hole lets that water out slowly. Yeah. So your plug hole is your flow control. And we do the same sort of thing. We've had to design our own flow controls because historically they would only manage big flows that, you know, down to sort of, I don't know, a pipe, 150 mil pipe worth or something like that. And to be honest, on these small sites or in small subcatchments, you've got to get down to, should we say 15, 20 millimeters, something like that. So we've had to design flow controls to manage those volumes and flows. And that's another, well, it's another discipline which you have to master. You have to understand, and the calculations are not difficult for this. There's a standard formula for it, and you have to understand that, you know, water goes out more quickly when it's deeper and more slowly when it's shallow, like in a bath. So once you, instead of having one big flow control at the end of the system, you might have 4 or 5, which would mean that each subcatchment is also being managed for flow as well as for pollution. Yeah. So none of this is beyond the capacity of somebody who wants to understand it. I mean, it's not like, you know, if you don't need a mathematical brain, but you do need a brain that says, how does this work? You know, how does natural rainfall work? And how do we translate this natural way of water being managed to an artificial condition? And what are our objectives? We want that water to flow slowly through the system, so we need flow controls, and we don't want them to block, so we've got to be very careful how we collect that water, so we don't let any crisp packets or black bin liners or anything else get in there. So we always use baskets like a gabion, but we use stainless steel baskets to do this. Yeah. And we want, as soon as possible, we want people to benefit from rainfall. Rainfall is a gift. It's a gift from upstairs, you know. That's the way I see rainfall, is a gift. And we should respect that. And we want, if we're going to pollute it, we take that pollution out as soon as possible, and we slow it down as soon as possible, so that we can enjoy it as soon as possible, and wildlife can enjoy it as soon as possible. It's not a sophisticated philosophy. It's a blooming obvious, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and as you're saying that, so you say it's a gift, and you know, I totally agree. But I guess is there not the business case to say, look, if we can manage water on this site and we can create biodiversity, we can create amenity, yeah, we can create pretty areas to live and work. Yeah. In crass terms, surely that adds to the land value of some, you know.
Well, I think that's what you see at the moment. It's a seller's market in a lot of these situations. And the way economics work is, I mean, why would you change what you've always done if what you've always done you can sell them without problem? Yeah. Why would you change what you've always done if you build an office block and people want to, you know, and it's the right price to go in the office block? They're not worried. Why would they put a green roof on there when somebody's allowing them to discharge all of their water into the sewer uncontrolled? And if you've got a load of people trying to nobody's flogging these sophisticated green solutions, but they are flogging plastic boxes. They are flogging concrete pipes. So you've got a lot of people.
Can I stop you there, Bob? So you said, why would somebody not do it? Correct me if I'm wrong, with the biodiversity net gain legislation that's coming in or in with local planning authorities?
Well, it's not legislation yet.
No, it's not, is it? No.
No, you see, well, interesting you should say that, because we're looking at that now. Now, there is a SuDS benefit here. If there's a biodiversity net gain for development, and instead of using it, just saying, well, we'll pay money into a bank, if we said, we'll take this development and we'll put aside an element of land from this development, which we will develop to provide biodiversity net gain. Say, for instance, it was a species poor green space, say, which a lot of agriculture is now. It's biologically dead.
Yeah.
If we can take water from that development, clean it through things like permeable pavements, green roofs, if necessary, a small forebay or whatever it might be, and then that water travels into the net gain green space. The enhanced quality of water, different types of water, wetland, pond, flowery meadow, all of these things, and they can combine to look beautiful. They can all combine to be a place that children can play, and they can all be a place where wildlife can live. I mean, what's not to do it? Why would we not do it?
Yeah.
But there will be a resistance because people don't like change, and the developer, if you like, the development industry is both conservative and it's suspicious of change. So why would, they've worked out what they see as a system that works. And so when some joker like me comes along and says, look, if you put a green roof on here, or if you put permeable pavement in here, the green space adjacent to this becomes seriously valuable for amenity, biodiversity, a social space. We're now trying to green our cities. There are initiatives to reduce the heat island effect. Water sloshing about helps that tremendously. So it's almost as though and I've felt this for the last 30 years, that I'm on a tipping point, but the bloody thing hasn't tipped yet, and you're sort of thinking, so one of these days somebody's going to say, why have we not done this? And it hasn't happened yet.
Part of me think it's like, how many more, I thought about this earlier, how many more weather events, how many more 1 in 100 weather events happen every other year?
Well, this year, was it earlier in October, 30 millimeters average rainfall in one day?
Yeah.
That's another record broken.
Yeah.
30 millimeters is something close to the 1 in 30, 1 in 40, 1 in 50 year return period. And all of our systems are designed to cope with that.
Because the thing is, I was going to mention that earlier. I mean, are you going to have to, as climate change kind of accelerates, is it going to have to be, reassess your equations, reassess the model?
Well, yes, because we're now the way we do this, we look at the return period, which is basically what's the likely volume in say a 1 in 30, over 1 in 30 years, or 1 in 100 years, or 1 in 1 year. But now we're adding 30%, 40% on top of that. But not only that, but we're also looking at quite, recently there's been talk of what sort of vegetation is going to be able to deal with this new climate. And therefore we're building in, hopefully in these SuDS schemes, we're building in resilience, not only to increase volumes and increase pollution risk. I mean, who thought about microplastics 10, 20 years ago? But SuDS will deal with that. And equally, because of the changes in landform which mean, if you're negative, you say, well, that's going to cost more to cut the grass. On the other hand, it's going to provide biodiverse, more interesting biodiverse responses because different parts of that land will be differently wet, there'll be different aspects. And of course, from a biodiversity point of view, the more topographical change that you create, the more valuable that space becomes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I try and look at where the disadvantages are in this, and I can't see them. Over 30 years, I'm thinking, well, what are the disadvantages to approaching rainfall in this way? And I can't see them, because all the evidence says it's at least cost neutral, possibly usually 10 to 30% less. It's managing a landscape, so it's picking up litter and cutting grass and checking the flow control. These are very simple things to do,
which should be included anyway within any basic maintenance contract.
Yeah, except of course, for instance, we've been doing some work, and the council maintenance guys say, well, at the moment we can get on a mower with a gang mower with 8 rotaries strung out the line, and we just go up this green space. It takes us no time to do. You've put all this stuff in the way. So you've got basins and things all in the way, and I'm having to agree that actually the maintenance, it would be marginally more expensive, perhaps 10%, something like that. But it's almost as though we've got to the habit of saying, well, the closer we can get to a green desert, the cheaper it's to look after. And then we're all thinking, well, I don't want to live in a green desert, And so, so all of these discussions they're still going on. They're still going on. So you say, look, we can control serious flooding in an area by putting these basins in, but it does mean that you can't run a gang mower across it. And then that could almost stop that happening, because there only has to be one part of the equation that doesn't add up. And so people it's almost as though there's a natural reaction. Say, that's a problem. That's a problem. And yet, people will be getting flooded. Biodiversity will be going down. The beauty and interest of their environment will be reducing. And yet, that one thing about the cost of maintenance will stop it all happening. Yeah. So we're still grappling with all of this. I think we still haven't got to the point where we say, what should we do? Let us do it and manage it. We haven't got there yet.
No, as you're talking, I'm thinking it's almost like big flooding events is going to force the issue. It's going to have to happen to keep on the issue. That gets to the point where planting trees, at the top of a mountain is not going to be the only solution, isn't it? That's always kind of said it when there's a.
And I think it's the idea of rewilding and making a better landscape that can deal with rainfall in these green areas, more trees, reducing impacts of grazing, all this sort of stuff. It's sometimes called rural SuDS. I think it's a misnomer, really. It's catchment rainwater management.
Yeah.
What I suppose we do, and what we're talking about, is the impact of development on rainfall. It's development. These techniques are really designed for where you've got development. You can use basins and swales, to manage rainfall elsewhere, but things like permeable pavement and things like these other things like green roofs, etc., that we're talking about, and most of it, the approach is we are trying to mitigate the effect that development has, so that our cities, town cities, and villages can behave in a much more sensitive way that mimics nature. And we've got a long way to go, not only to retrofit this stuff, but also to bring people along with us. Most people I speak to, ordinary people, have said to me, why have we not done this before? And the answer is the establishment, if you like, our professional establishment and our bureaucratic establishment, our local authority establishment, can't make that adjustment at the moment. Yeah. There's lots of exceptions to that, but the overall, we are still seeing the pipe to bomb crater at the 95% of our. So they recognise there's a problem with the volume. What they don't recognise is all these other things that we're talking about. So, way to go.
but as what you said earlier about retrofitting, because again,
Yeah.
and I'm doing this podcast from Cambridge, and Cambridge is a lovely new town, isn't it? Nice from
It is. There was an old town there once, but it looks like they've got living in the new town now.
But it's like, how would you retrofit? I mean, again, I've seen it on a few occasions, but how could you retrofit, say, you know, a place like Cambridge? What perhaps tangible things could one do? Is it sort of integrated tree pits?
Funnily enough, we're writing some stuff on that as we speak, for a client, local authority client. Retrofit. We always think that there's new development, greenfield development.
Yeah.
There's redevelopment. So you can redevelopment is almost the same as greenfield, because you knock everything down and you can start again. But with retrofit, you're going into an existing landscape and you're putting interventions in, which they're nearly always going to cost you money, because you're mucking around with an existing landscape. But if you look at the existing landscapes, you can see, first of all, you can see green space. So every urban green space ought to be managing rainfall.
Yeah.
But again, many parks department don't want that to happen, because they say it'll increase costs, it will disturb what we're doing now, i.e., ironically, they are conservative in terms of change. Mm. The highways guys were very conservative, but they are now embracing this idea of collecting polluted water off highways in things called bioretention structures. Yeah. So you combine the narrowing of roads, or the one in Sheffield you're probably aware of, Greater Green Project. That's where four-lane highway was reduced to a two-way line when the bus arrangement was changed. Now, they could easily have just, they could have just paved it. But what they did was they've created an urban meadow. Mm. And that urban meadow takes every bit of rainfall from around there, and it's linked straight to the River Don. Mm. So the link to the River Don is a small length of pipe. But the water if any water does get into the Don, and they've monitored it, and much of it just goes straight into the gravel and stuff underneath. Mm. But whether it takes that route or it goes directly from the pipe, it will be clean, and it will be going out at something like greenfield runoff rate, 5-10 litres per second per hectare, something like that. I don't know what they've described. Now, what I'm saying here is that is retrofit, and it's cost a lot of money. It's completely rejuvenated that part of the city. Yes. Yeah. So if you see retrofit either as a way of hitting hot spots of pollution or hot spots of flooding, that's fine. But equally, you could see it as part of regenerating the city. Now, in London at the moment, they're saying there's a real problem because of the heat island effect. London is heating up. Mm. The most effective way to deal with that is change hard surfaces, soft surfaces where possible, permeable surfaces where possible, and introducing water. Yeah. As they do in Southern Europe, they go and slosh water around everywhere. Yeah. So retrofit may be that retrofit becomes something you have to do to make places livable. Mm. So in some ways, the problems of the past and the climate change of the future is catching up with us. And SuDS is one of those things which will make cities worth living in.
But it's as you're talking, I'm just thinking it's such an opportunity, back to the biodiversity side, it's such an opportunity. You've got this free gift that's coming out the sky. Yeah. It's so bloody, well, it's obvious to us, isn't it? But how it can...
It's how you persuade people that you're not some green warrior, or you're not some lunatic on the fringe. This should be mainstream. Should be something that everybody talks about around their kitchen table, saying, why is this not happening? Why is my street not got green features in it? Why is water running down my street full of oil and all the rest of it and going into the local stream? Why are we not managing this properly? Mm. It's a responsibility we have to manage rainfall so that it provides us with the benefits that are inherent in it. Yeah. If if I believed in God, God would be saying, why are you abusing this resource that I'm giving you? And that's why I call it a gift from the sky. It's a gift and we abuse it.
Yeah.
Why are we not looking after it? We should be, shouldn't we?
We should. And again, as you're talking, so I live in Cambridge, and in the local plan,
yeah,
it's being discussed at the moment, there is 30,000 new houses as part of that.
Yeah.
So if we are not conserving, using every single drop of that water in an existing water stressed part of the country.
And they're probably, at the moment, all of the schemes will be pipes to ponds or pipes to bomb craters. It's flat landscape, so as soon as it's in a hole, you've got to pump it. Yeah. And you've got very, very sensitive water environments within, a very short distance from Cambridge. You've got the fens, you've got all of these wetlands, which you're asking to clean up the mess that Cambridge is generating.
Yeah.
Cambridge should clean up its own mess, or shouldn't generate the mess in the first place.
Mm. A part of me is thinking that there are a couple of developers that are working in around Cambridge that are doing fantastic.
It may be. Oh, that's great. And that's great.
No, but again, that's Cambridge, and these are larger developments that are got good people behind them. But no, it can be done. That's what I'm guessing. I'm trying to make. So Bob, we're just coming up to an hour, and I'm conscious you're a very busy, very important man. So
I'm going for a walk. Never mind anything else.
Good stuff. So Bob, before you take the dog out, do you want to just let people know where they can find you, and sort of website, social media? I guess you're not a social media person, are you?
No. Certainly not. No, face to face, mate.
Good stuff. So, what? So
the best place to get to us. I mean, we're info@robertbrayassociates.co.uk, and we've got a website which has got a lot of our schemes on, which hopefully people will find interesting, which is www.sustainabledrainage.com. So, we don't hide ourselves under a bushel. So you'll find us if you look for us. Excellent. And we've got some really interesting stuff on at the moment. We're doing training. If you have a look at our website, you'll see how to get in touch with us. But info@robertbrayassociates.co.uk.
Excellent. And what I'll also do, Bob, is we talked about the document by SEPA by Jeremy Briggs. I'll put that in the link below. So when people
it's called Ponds, Pools, and Lochans, Lochans.
Lochans, lock in, but not a lock-in.
Yes, it's not lock-in. It's a lovely, lovely book, and I think that it's not as positive about SuDS as I think it should be, but that's because it was written in 2000. It's originally written in 2000. It should be a free download off the SEPA website.
Yeah.
But equally, the other one I would recommend for people to have a look at is from your previous contributor to you, which is Gary Grant, the Bat Conservation Trust. I think it's called A Landscape and Urban Design for Bats and Biodiversity.
Yeah. Wow.
That's I think he's done a fabulous job there.
He's all right, Gary, isn't he? He's
good man.
Yeah. So funny you should say that. The next podcast we've got Joe Ferguson from the Bat Conservation Trust. So it's a
there you are.
Yeah, so
I commend them because he has taken what could have been just a simple small subject. It includes SuDS in it, but it gives a really good background to understanding biodiversity, and it also, from my perspective, it shows how important SuDS can be in terms of looking after bat conservation. But equally, it could have come from the amphibian and reptile group. It could have come from any other group as well. So it's a really good one to have a look at. And as I say, if anybody's interested, we also, if you want to look at SuDS design, our SuDS design and evaluation guide online, that's available online.
Yeah, I'll
have a look at that.
Yeah, it's a good document.
Well, thank you very much. Nice pictures.
You're a guest. I couldn't say, oh, that's a terrible document.
Well, some nice pictures in it, if nothing else.
Keeps everybody amused.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your time. Thanks.
Pleasure.